For a medieval woman, the death of her husband wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a seismic shift, an upheaval that could leave her suddenly vulnerable or surprisingly powerful, depending entirely on her circumstances. She might find herself adrift, her social standing suddenly precarious, her economic future uncertain.
Changes everything.
Or she might, in a twist of
lands are
fate,
mine.
gain a level of autonomy previously unimaginable. This wasn't the kind of freedom we talk about today. Not exactly. It was
My
a freedom
husband,
born
my
of
protector,
necessity,
verdict
often
is
fraught
gone.
with danger. Yet within that narrow window, a woman might, against all odds, find love again. Imagine being a widow in the 13th century.
I stand at a crossroads.
Your life, until
torn
very
between
recently,
solitude and stepping
was defined by
into
your
the
husband. He was your protector,
Beyond
your provider,
heirs.
often the
Discovering
manager of your
complexities and
inheritance,
triumphs.
your very connection to society's intricate web.
Curious viewer,
Now
subscribe
he's
to
gone.
peel back the
The
layers of
immediate
medieval
grief, the
life.
ritualistic
Witness
mourning, it
history
all passes,
unfold
but
on this
then
journey.
The stark reality sets in. What happens next? Does she retreat into solitude, or does she by necessity step back into the world, navigating a complex social landscape to secure her future, perhaps even her heart? If you've ever wondered about the true complexities of medieval life beyond the jousts and castles, this deep dive into the lives of widows, their struggles, and their unexpected triumphs will certainly surprise you. Consider hitting that subscribe button if this journey through history sparks your curiosity, because we're only just beginning to peel back the layers. Life in the Middle Ages was, by modern standards, brutally short and incredibly uncertain. Plagues, famines, childbirth, and incessant warfare meant that death was a constant companion, especially for men. A woman could easily find herself widowed multiple times in her life, a fact that often goes overlooked. And when a husband died, it wasn't just an emotional void, it created a gaping practical chasm. Who would manage the lands, the finances, the children? Who would protect her from ambitious relatives or opportunistic neighbors? This was the immediate pressing problem for any medieval widow. The conflict wasn't just external, it was internal. On one hand, society often expected a widow to remarry, especially if she was young, had children, or held valuable property. Her single status was seen as an anomaly, potentially disruptive. Yet on the other hand, a widow, particularly one of noble birth or with significant dower rights, suddenly held a surprising degree of agency. She might control vast estates, sometimes even whole lordships, for the first time in her life. This power, however, was a double-edged sword. It made her an incredibly attractive prospect for new husbands, but also a target. How did a woman navigate this treacherous terrain, balancing societal pressure, personal grief, and the very real need for security, all while trying to discern a suitable partner, or perhaps, for the fortunate few, even a chance at genuine affection? So, how did they find this love, or at least a new partner, in a world so different from our own? It rarely started with hearts and flowers. For many, remarriage was a strategic imperative. A widow, even a wealthy one, was vulnerable. She needed a man to run the estate, to fight in her name, to represent her in court, to manage her affairs in a society where women had limited legal standing. A young widow, especially one with heirs, was a prime candidate for remarriage to ensure the stability of her children's inheritance and upbringing. The Church, while theoretically promoting perpetual widowhood as a virtuous state, often conceded to the practicalities. The spiritual ideal frequently clashed with the earthly reality. Consider the formidable figure of the wealthy widow. She was a prize. If her previous marriage had been childless, her dower, the portion of her deceased husband's estate set aside for her support, could be substantial, sometimes a third or even half of his lands and income. She might even have inherited property outright from her own family. This made her incredibly desirable. Suddenly, knights, minor nobles, and even powerful lords would come calling, or more accurately, sending their emissaries. The courtship wasn't a matter of romantic serenades, but intense negotiations over property, succession, and alliances. A widow, in this position, held a rare bargaining chip. She could, to a surprising extent, choose her next husband, or at least reject suitors she found unsuitable. A power almost unheard of for unmarried women who were typically married off by their fathers or guardians. But this freedom wasn't absolute. If a widow was still under the feudal wardship of an overlord, particularly the king, her hand could still be bestowed upon someone else to serve political or financial ends. The crown profited immensely from the sale of marriages and wardships, yet, even here, A clever or determined widow could exert influence, perhaps petitioning the king, leveraging family connections, or subtly campaigning for a preferred suitor. These weren't passive women waiting for fate. Many were shrewd operators in a cutthroat world. The idea of love itself was also different. While romantic love existed, as evidenced in troubadour poetry and courtly literature, it wasn't necessarily the primary driver for marriage, especially for a widow. Marriages were about alliances, about consolidating power, about ensuring lineage and security. Yet, within these pragmatic arrangements, affection could blossom. Companionship, mutual respect, and shared purpose could evolve into a deep bond. Sometimes a widow might choose a man she already knew and trusted, perhaps a landless knight who had served her late husband, or a childhood friend. This pragmatic approach didn't preclude tenderness. Let's think about the practical mechanisms. How did they actually meet potential partners? It wasn't through dating apps or social clubs. For the nobility, the courts of lords and kings were crucial social hubs. Tournaments, feasts, church gatherings, and formal visits provided opportunities. For commoners, the local market, the church, and community festivals were primary meeting points. But for a widow specifically, her status often brought suitors directly to her door. She didn't have to go out to find someone. They came to her, often quite assertively. Her social network, her family, and even her late husband's retainers might play a role in identifying suitable matches. Consider the tale of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman whose life, though extraordinary, highlights some of these dynamics. Widowed from King Louis VII of France, she quickly remarried Henry Plantagenet, who would become King Henry II of England. This wasn't about finding love in the modern sense. It was a political earthquake. But for many lesser-known widows, the stakes were personal rather than continental. They sought stability, companionship, and a way to continue their lives with dignity. Sometimes the second marriage offered a chance at a different kind of happiness. Perhaps the first marriage had been purely arranged, cold, or even abusive. A second chance, particularly if the widow had more say in the choice, could lead to a more harmonious partnership. There are records of widows negotiating prenuptial agreements, ensuring their dower rights would be protected, and sometimes even dictating terms for the upbringing of their children from the previous marriage. This demonstrates a surprising level of agency for women in a period often seen as entirely patriarchal. They were not entirely powerless. They used what leverage they had: their property, their connections, and their experience. The process was rarely straightforward. Family members keen to protect their own interests might interfere. Brothers-in-law might try to seize her dower lands. Her own family might push for a match that benefited them. The church, despite its general stance on remarriage, would issue dispensations, making exceptions for various reasons, especially if a powerful lord needed a new wife. So, while a widow might have a say, she also faced immense pressure from all sides. The journey to a new partnership was a tightrope walk between personal desire and powerful external forces. This constant balancing act, this careful dance between what she wanted and what was expected, or even demanded, is what truly defined the medieval widow's quest for love, or, at the very least, security and a future. They found it often not in grand romantic gestures, but in resilient negotiation, shrewd observation, and sometimes a quiet understanding that blossomed into a lasting bond. If this deep dive into the fascinating, complex world of medieval widows has given you a new perspective on history, do consider subscribing for more stories that defy modern assumptions.